Welcome to Behavioral Intelligence Con Mara Sánchez. Today we are doing a custom-tailored deep dive into something that is basically the lifeblood of our field.
Oh, absolutely. We're getting into BCBA Foundation's C.11, interpreting graphed data.
Right. And really quick before we jump in, you can always find more resources for your clinical practice or, your exam prep at www.amethysttherapyservices.com or just reach out to us at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
Yeah, we always love hearing from you guys. So let's get right into the mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah, so if you've ever right-clicked on a website and selected View Source, you know what happens, right?
Yeah.
You are instantly hit with this massive, overwhelming wall of text.
Oh yeah, just thousands of lines of raw HTML, brackets, numbers.
Exactly. You stare at it and you literally can't tell if you're looking at a recipe for chocolate chip cookies or like a highly secure baking portal. It is complete gibberish to the human eye.
Right. I mean, it is data, certainly, but it's entirely devoid of meaning until it actually runs through a processor that can organize it.
And staring at a raw behavior data sheet is exactly the same experience. A practitioner hands you a clipboard full of tally marks and timestamps, and you just see noise.
Total noise.
Oh.
Which is why today we're going to act as your browser. We're translating those raw tallies into the beautiful web page that actually tells you if a behavioral intervention is, saving a life or failing completely.
Yes. We're pulling from this incredibly dense stack of clinical study guides, the ethics code for behavior analysts, and of course, a bunch of mock exams.
Because look, behavior analysts simply cannot rely on gut feelings. I mean, we don't rely on subjective reports from a tired parent or a stressed teacher saying, I think things are going a bit better this week.
Right, because a bit better isn't measurable.
Exactly. Visual analysis is the absolute lifeblood of applied behavior analysis. It's how professionals ethically, accurately, and confidently make treatment decisions. Without plotting the data visually, we are essentially navigating a ship completely blindfolded.
Okay, let's actually unpack this core logic here, because before we figure out how to read a graph, we need to understand why we're graphing in the first place, rather than just running those raw numbers through some statistical software program.
Yeah, that's a great point. And our sources point back to some foundational research by Cooper and colleagues from 2007, which really outlines the immediate, real-time power of graphic displays.
Because it is different from other sciences.
Very different. In a lot of other scientific fields, you collect data for months, you hand it over to a statistician, and then you wait for a complex report to tell you if your treatment worked. But in ABA, graphing provides an immediate visual record.
You do it right then and there.
Exactly. A behavior analyst plots the data right after the observation session. And this allows for real-time exploration of behavioral variations. Like, if an intervention to reduce self-injury is actually making the behavior worse, you see the line spike today.
You don't find out next month.
Right. You don't wait a month while the client is suffering.
The sources also refer to visual analysis as a conservative method for determining the significance of behavior change. And when I hear the word conservative in science, I usually think of playing it safe.
Well, in this specific context, conservative means we are setting a very high bar for success. We aren't using fancy mathematical formulas like p-values to tease out some tiny hidden effect that barely exists in the real world.
Okay, so it has to be obvious.
Yes. Graphs force independent judgments. If a behavioral intervention is truly working, you shouldn't need a calculator to prove it. The change should be so stark and obvious on the page that literally anyone can see the line drop or climb.
Let's ground this. Let's use the Jim Bob example from our sources. Imagine a caregiver hands you a frequency sheet tracking Jim Bob's screaming behavior.
Oh, the classic frequency sheet. Just dates and tallies.
Right. It's just a column of dates and a column of tally marks.
Mm-hmm.
So Monday has 6 tallies, Tuesday has 5, Wednesday spikes to 11, Thursday drops to 2. By next Friday, it's 0.
And staring at that raw column requires massive cognitive load. Your brain is trying to hold all those numbers, calculate an average, spot a pattern all simultaneously. You might see that 11 on Wednesday and totally panic, thinking the behavior is out of control.
But the moment you plot those exact same numbers on a line graph, the chaos just disappears. You draw a vertical phase line to separate your baseline, the data before you did anything, from your intervention phase.
And then you draw another vertical line for a reversal phase, where you temporarily remove the treatment just to see what happens.
And the story practically jumps off the page. You see the data path hovering around 6 screams a day in baseline, plummeting steadily towards 0 during the intervention, and spiking right back up the moment you enter the reversal phase.
Which instantly proves that your specific treatment is the variable controlling Jim Bob's behavior.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just a helpful organizational trick. Our sources emphasize that graphing is an actual ethical obligation under Code 2.17.
Yes, absolutely. Stakeholders, parents, teachers, the clients themselves, they have a right to visually see their progress. You can't just walk into a team meeting and ask a family to trust your professional authority. You have to show them the evidence in a visual language they can easily digest.
Which brings us to the vocabulary of that visual language. Whether you're in a clinic or taking your BCBA exam, there are fundamental laws of behavior analysis you use to read a graph. We look for 3 specific elements, right? Level, trend, and variability.
The big 3.
Let's start with level. I always think of level as the altitude of an airplane. It's the overall value of the data path on the SS. Are we flying high at 10,000 feet or flying low at 2,000 feet? Like, are the incidents hovering up high around 10 per day or down low around 2?
That altitude metaphor works perfectly for a really common trap people fall into when analyzing data. Let's say phase 1 of your graph has data bouncing sporadically between 4 and 14 incidents.
Okay.
Then you implement your intervention in phase 2, and the data points form a totally different shape. Maybe they're clustered differently, but they are still bouncing between 4 and 14.
Oh, I see. The pattern looks different, so you might think you changed something, but the altitude hasn't actually changed.
Exactly. They occupy the exact same vertical space on the axis, which means the level is identical. The intervention didn't lower the overall rate of the behavior.
Got it. Okay, moving from level, we look at trend. And trend is the overall trajectory the data path is taking. Is it pointing up, pointing down, or is it a 0 trend, meaning it's completely flat?
And practitioners will tell you that trend is the absolute best element to communicate progress to a worried parent, because level just tells you where you are right now.
Right, which might be a tough conversation. You might have to say, yes, your child is still engaging in aggression 5 times a day.
Exactly. But trend shows the destination. You can point to the graph and say, look, a month ago, it was 15 times a day. The line is pointing steadily downward. It's literally the visual representation of hope.
I love that. So the third element is variability, which measures how consistent the data points are to each other. It's the turbulence in our airplane metaphor. How violently are the data points zigzagging up and down from one day to the next?
Right.
But wait, if I'm running a treatment program and my data is highly variable, just zigzagging wildly all over the place with 0 predictability, my immediate instinct is to panic. I would assume the intervention is a total disaster and we have absolutely no control over the behavior.
Well, during a treatment phase, that high variability is indeed a problem. It makes it nearly impossible to draw a clear trend line and claim any sort of success. However, during a functional analysis, an FA, that exact same chaotic variability can be a massive clue.
Wait, really? How does total chaos give us an answer? Walk us through what an FA actually looks like in practice.
Sure. So in a functional analysis, you are systematically testing different environments to figure out why a behavior is happening. You place the client in a demand condition where a therapist repeatedly presents a difficult task, like a math worksheet, and you measure if the client hits to escape the work.
Okay, makes sense.
Then you try an attention condition where the therapist ignores the client to see if they hit to get a reaction. You have a play condition with free access to toys, and an alone condition where the client is completely by themselves.
So you are isolating triggers. You're looking for the one specific room where the hitting just goes through the roof.
Exactly. But what if the data is highly variable and occurs at similar chaotic rates across all of those conditions? The client hits during math, hits while playing, hits while getting attention, and hits while sitting alone in an empty room.
Oh. Well, it means they aren't hitting to escape a worksheet, and they aren't hitting to get the therapist to look at them, because it happens everywhere, regardless of the environment.
Yes. That chaotic variability across all conditions strongly suggests the behavior has an automatic or sensory function. The behavior simply produces an internal sensation that feels good to the individual, so they do it regardless of the social context.
Wow.
In that specific assessment phase, the variability isn't a failure of experimental control. It is the exact answer you were looking for.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. You can completely misinterpret level, trend, and variability if you are looking at the wrong type of graph. The tool you use to measure has to match the dimension of the behavior you're trying to change.
Oh, absolutely. The equal interval line graph is the absolute gold standard in ABA. Both the x-axis for time and the y-axis for the behavior are spaced in equal, consistent increments.
And our sources highlight a classic Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis study, right? They used a simple line graph to track how many bites of food a client expelled during meals.
Yeah, the Jabba Spoon presentation study. They plotted the day-to-day frequency of expelled bites across different spoon presentations, and a line graph captures that daily fluctuation perfectly.
But what if you don't care about the daily fluctuation? What if your entire goal is the total volume of a behavior over a long period? A daily line graph going up and down won't show you that clearly. That's when you switch lenses to the cumulative record.
Right, because a cumulative record adds today's data to yesterday's data. Because of this, the data path on the graph can never decrease. It can only climb higher or stay perfectly flat.
It operates exactly like the odometer on your car. Your odometer cannot go backward.
Correct.
If you drive 10 miles today, it goes up 10 miles. If you leave the car parked in the driveway tomorrow, the line on your graph just stays flat.
Exactly.
And that flat line doesn't mean the car is broken. It just means the behavior driving didn't happen today. But your cumulative total mileage stays exactly the same.
And you can take that odometer logic straight into an educational setting. A cumulative record is incredibly motivating for skill acquisition. If you're tracking the total number of spelling words a student has mastered, or the total pages of a book they've read over a semester, a cumulative record shows this beautiful, ever-growing mountain of achievement. You want to see that steep slope.
But let's pivot the logic again. What if volume isn't the issue at all? What if you urgently need to know exactly when a behavior is being triggered? A cumulative record can't tell you that. A daily line graph might obscure it. You have to switch to a scatter plot.
Right, a scatter plot is designed entirely to find temporal or environmental patterns. You typically put the time of day on the axis and the days of the month on the x-axis.
So going back to our Jim Bob example, let's say Jim Bob is running around the facility screaming and the exhausted staff tells you it's happening all the time. It feels random and constant.
Which is what staff will usually say when they're overwhelmed.
Exactly. But when you plot every single occurrence on a scatter plot, a picture emerges. You see a massive, tight cluster of dots right at 11:45 a.m. and another dense cluster at 1:45 p.m.
And suddenly the behavior isn't happening all the time. It's highly predictable. 11:45 a.m. is right before lunch, and 1:45 p.m. is right before nap time.
Oh, wow.
The scatter plot points directly to specific environmental triggers. Perhaps Jim Bob is struggling with hunger, or perhaps he exhibits severe anxiety around major transitions. You just couldn't see that temporal pattern on a standard line graph.
That makes so much sense. We also need to explore the changing criterion design. When you graph this, it literally looks like a set of stairs climbing up or stepping down.
It's used when you want to gradually shape a behavior in steps, rather than demanding an immediate drastic change.
The sources offer a great everyday example for this. Imagine you have a daughter who constantly throws her clothes on the floor. Her baseline is 0. She uses the hamper 0 days a week. Instead of demanding perfection immediately, you offer her a $5 allowance if she can use the hamper just 2 days a week. And you draw a horizontal line on your graph at the 2-day mark.
Right. And once she reliably hits that 2-day criterion, your data stabilizes. You've proven you have a little bit of control. Then you change the criterion. You tell them she only gets the $5 if she uses the hamper 3 days a week. You draw a new horizontal line, a step higher.
And her behavior steps up to meet it. So the data path looked like a staircase. You're visually proving that your specific allowance contingency is controlling the behavior because her performance perfectly matches each new criterion step you set.
This actually brings up a really critical point about cognitive load and graph selection. As the expert practitioner, you might look at 90 complex daily line graphs of a client's severe biting behavior and see a beautiful, subtle descending trend hidden in all that variability.
But if you hand 90 daily line graphs to a stressed, overwhelmed parent at a kitchen table, you're essentially handing them the raw HTML code again. They can't see the web page.
Exactly, you will induce panic. For that parent, taking those 90 data points and converting them into a simple histogram, a bar graph showing the average monthly bites over a 3-month period, is vastly superior. It summarizes the data and clearly communicates the narrative that the intervention is working without burying them in daily turbulence.
And because these graphs tell such a powerful, persuasive story, behavior analysts carry an enormous ethical responsibility to ensure that the story is actually true. A beautifully formatted, perfectly scaled graph of a terrible intervention is still a failure.
The ethics code tackles this directly in Code 6.11, accuracy and use of data. Behavior analysts cannot fabricate data, and they are strictly prohibited from cherry-picking results to make a treatment look more effective than it really is.
And our sources highlight a pretty sobering real-world example of this called the data gone warehouse case. A researcher implemented a behavioral contract designed to reduce workplace injuries in this massive warehouse. And initially, it worked flawlessly. Injuries dropped to zero for 14 straight days. The graph looked incredible. But on the final 2 days of the study, injuries spiked by 5% and 7%.
Yeah. And the researcher, likely desperate to show a pristine intervention and publish a perfect study, excluded those last 2 days from the final graph. They justified it by calling those spikes aberrations.
I have to admit, I genuinely struggle with the counterintuitive nature of this. I mean, I understand we can't just invent numbers out of thin air, but isn't it incredibly tempting to drop an outlier if you firmly believe the intervention works? Like, what if someone just tripped over their own shoelaces in the warehouse?
Right, an accident.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with the safety contract failing. So why let one clumsy moment ruin a beautiful graph of a successful intervention?
What's fascinating here is that empiricism, the foundational attitude of science, does not care what you firmly believe. Empiricism dictates that our observations must be objective and unbiased. If we start throwing out the data points that don't fit our preferred narrative, we are no longer doing science. We are doing public relations.
Wow, we're just drawing the picture we want to see.
Exactly. We must present data in its entirety. The scientific community, the parents, and the stakeholders, they must be allowed to look at the whole picture and make their own independent judgments. If there's a massive outlier, you graph it, and then you explain the context like the tripped shoelaces in your clinical notes. You do not erase the reality of what happened.
And this ties directly into the concept of treatment integrity or procedural fidelity. This is measuring whether the intervention is being implemented exactly as it was designed.
A lack of treatment integrity is the hidden culprit behind so many flatlining graphs. You might design a brilliant, evidence-based intervention, but if the frontline staff is only following the steps correctly 40% of the time, the data is going to look highly variable and ineffective. The graph will look like a failure, but the behavior plan isn't failing. The implementation is failing.
Speaking of implementation, our sources point out a massive conceptual mistake practitioners make when deciding when to start a treatment. Let's say you take on a new case to decrease a client's aggressive behavior. You start taking your baseline data before you've introduced any treatment. And you notice that the aggression is already showing a descending trend. It's naturally going down on its own.
And the instinct for many is to say, excellent, the client is primed for change, implement the intervention right now.
Exactly. My immediate thought is, my job is to help this client. My goal is to drop the aggression. If it's already dropping, why on earth would I pause? Shouldn't I pile on the intervention to help them even faster?
It is a wonderful thing for the client's immediate well-being, but scientifically, it is the worst possible time to start an experiment. Visual analysis requires experimental control. If the aggressive behavior is already decreasing and you introduce your intervention and the behavior continues to decrease, how can you possibly prove your intervention was the cause?
You can't. It might have just kept going down naturally, and your intervention actually did nothing.
Precisely. This is the danger of false attribution. If you falsely attribute the success to your intervention, and then 6 months later the aggression returns, you will re-implement a useless treatment plan thinking it's the cure. You ruin long-term treatment clarity. You must wait for the baseline data to stabilize or trend in the opposite direction of your goal before you intervene. Otherwise, the graph tells a meaningless story.
Wow. Let's pull all this together. Because interpreting behavioral data is not simply about memorizing definitions for domain C.11. It's about translating the raw, chaotic reality of human behavior into a clear visual language. By mastering level, trend, and variability, and by understanding exactly which graph acts as the right lens for the right moment, you can ethically and effectively prove that your interventions are changing lives.
Absolutely. Though I do want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Single subject designs and visual analysis rely entirely on the human eye looking at a data path. We don't rely on the rigid statistical formulas of large group studies, but human beings are naturally wired to seek out patterns, and we are heavily prone to confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So if we are the ones who design the treatment and we are the ones visually evaluating the graph, how do we protect our visual analysis from our own subconscious desire to see our hard work succeed?
It is so easy to fall victim to that. If we aren't careful, confirmation bias acts like a funhouse mirror. We hold up our data, and the mirror stretches the trend line and distorts the variability just enough to make our intervention look taller, stronger, and more successful than it actually is. We have to strip away the distortion and look at the true reflection of the data, bugs and all.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Stay tuned for our next session, where we will tackle the final topic in Domain C, C.12 Procedural Integrity Measurement. We'll see you then.